Taddy Hall is with us today at Aqui Ahora, Here and Now, a podcast created by PAG.law, specialist in venture capital operating across the hemisphere. After I finished school, said Taddy Hall, I moved to Chile. I didn't know Spanish, I didn't have a job, but it was the best decision I ever made in my life. Living by the principle of fortune favors the bold, Taddy has been making entrepreneurs in Latin America and around the world to smile and to think for the past 20 years. Many in Latin America know Taddy as a tireless mentor and senior advisor for Endeavor, a network of 2,000 plus high-impact chief executives in emerging markets. His day job is as senior partner of innovation at Lippincott. Taddy is a frequent speaker and author. His articles have appeared in Harvard Business Review, in the Wall Street Journal, Adage, Huffington Post, and Time Magazine, among others. Taddy also co-authored the Online Advertising Playbook and the best-selling Competing Against Luck. And competing against luck, we have here with us today Taddy Hall and Juan Pablo Cappello.
Taddy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Juan Pablo. It's great to see you. It's fun to be here with you and your massive audience.
Yeah, well, but my mother, my dad, and my three kids.
Yeah. Don't forget the animals.
Exactly. No, it's funny. You're one of these people that I've known you for probably 15 plus years, and every time I read something you write, I'm like, I don't feel like I know this guy well enough. We need to be better friends. I've prepared. I don't know if preparing's a word, but I was looking around a little bit, and to read that quote that you write saying, "I finished business school and I moved to Chile with no Spanish or job. It was the best decision I ever made." I'm like, I love the guy. I don't want my 23-year-old daughter to read that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so let's and obviously a lot of people, at least in LATAM, know you as a tireless mentor at Endeavor. You've gone to probably a record number of ISPs of Endeavor, and the last time your name came up, I was chatting with Debbie Jaffe from Endeavor Peru, who said you had done an amazing presentation for her group.
That's really nice of her, and I love the whole Endeavor Peru team, but I love Endeavor, and I actually, when I travel, and my day job takes me everywhere, but I always try and stick in. I did a thing for Endeavor Italy in November, and and I've done stuff for Colombia and other places. So anyhow, any excuse to do Endeavor stuff is awesome.
No, that's great, and sort of. When you started in LATAM, and I was actually just looking at this because I interviewed the person who came up with the concept behind WIDA, was their first CEO. In 2011, there was only 150 million of venture activity in LATAM. And last year, there was 4.4 billion. It was a 32x growth.
Oh my gosh. That's incredible.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, Jesus Christ, when you and I were going to ISPs in, Uruguay in 2005, there was probably, if there was only 150 and 11, I don't know, there was probably 100 million or 75 million in the whole region.
I had no idea it was that small, and I worked for Advent International.
Right.
And it's not an interesting story, but I went to them right out of college. As sort of a joke, I think that the founder, Peter Brook, who was very involved in the earliest days of Endeavor as well.
Oh, wow.
And Peter Brook was, and Linda Rotenberg, knows Peter well. Anyhow, Peter kind of hired me as a joke out of college, I think, because we both played lacrosse. And anyhow, I worked for Advent in Boston for 3 years before business school.
Oh, wow.
Then went to Chile for 3 years. And at that time is when Ernest Bacharach was just starting
Right.
Advent's operations in Latin America with a headquarters in Buenos Aires. And he sort of like lured me like, hey, come to Argentina, come help us set up Advent. And so we were there, and that was 97.
Wow.
Starting Advent's venture activity. And we really were Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico.
Right.
And we had offices in those three places and kind of dabbled elsewhere. But it was the interesting thing at that time, for sure, is you had like US groups that would maybe take a strategy that had worked somewhere else and bring it down. Like I remember so the DLJ venture arm decided like, hey, we're going to do a roll up of Argentine like ambulance operators. And I'm like, that's like one guy in a minivan, right?
Right.
I'm like, you have no idea what you're doing.
Right.
But anyhow, that was a long time ago, but I'm not surprised that things have changed.
Yeah, well, yeah, hopefully things have changed. But when you got to Chile in those 3 years, I mean, that must have been a big culture shock.
It was exciting. And one of the things I really loved about being there then was there was a tiny expat community. And I really liked that, because it wasn't like, and I think the reason for that is like the big investment banks, like the big management consulting firms, like they would have an office in Sao Paulo and maybe in like Buenos Aires.
Right.
I'm sure they'd have one in Mexico City and maybe Bogota, maybe Lima, but no one had anything in Santiago then. And so the organizations that would like, pump in a bunch of expats really weren't there.
Right.
They all operated with like partnerships and they'd have some affiliate relationship. And so it was really neat that there were no expats there. In some ways, that was like one of my advantages, because when I first got there, I didn't know. I mean, like I got there with like a fistful of phone numbers.
Right.
And I literally stuck my car on a boat in Baltimore, thinking, and I didn't even know you couldn't bring your car. Like you guys, I ended up like driving around and selling it in like Arica, like in Iquique in the free trade zone, like 5 years later. But anyhow, long story short, it's like I just showed up with like a fistful of phone numbers. But because I had, and it was interesting, I just graduated from Harvard Business School, and so that made me sort of interesting.
Right.
No one thought it was valuable. They just thought it was interesting, right?
Right.
And
no one was going to overpay for that degree.
Yeah, like let's be clear. And the other thing that I hadn't appreciated is like, so I had done independent study at Harvard with Michael Porter.
Right.
And Porter, for whatever reason, was like an institution in Chile. In fact, he was called like El Porter, like not
right.
He's just a guy,
like Sting.
Right.
Right.
And Mike had introduced me to a bunch of people. And so the long and the short is like a bunch of people were willing to talk to me. No intention of giving me a job, but the combination of just being a little bit of an oddity and then this sort of Harvard Michael Porter thing, like, let's talk to him. And so I had all these conversations, and one thing led to another.
Well, so what's interesting to me, especially, I didn't realize I known your pasada por Santiago. I didn't realize it was 3 years and it was that early. That's amazing.
94 to 97.
Wow. So even before we launched Patagon, I mean, those were early days.
Absolutely right. That's right. In fact, full disclosure, Linda came down, and that's how I met her. Someone's like, "Oh, you're going to Chile. Like, you should meet this guy." And she described what was going to be Endeavor to me. And I was like, that sounds like the stupidest idea I've ever heard.
You and me both.
I was like,
I remember when Wences brought up like that, okay, we're going to this ISP, or he's going to this ISP panel. I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds. And I just was like, he was like, do these gringos really like? What's their angle? Like, they're not just gonna, like, he's just trying to figure out, like, okay, they're saying it's philanthropic, like. That doesn't exist. It's funny. It's like Linda says it, that when she started in Latin America, there wasn't a word for entrepreneurship in Spanish. I'm not sure I agree with that. I do agree that there was no word for philanthropy that anyone believed. Like that's 100% the case. Like I'm like, Linda, no. It's people. It wasn't they had a problem understanding entrepreneurship as a concept. They just didn't believe anyone was going to give support for free.
That's so funny. Yeah, well.
No, what I was going to ask is in terms of sort of the I sort of look like there's been waves of generations of entrepreneurs at this stage in the region. That there was sort of that first wave of sort of pioneering entrepreneurs like Wences and Marcos Galperin, Mike Santos from Technisys, who I've had on the podcast, and those people who've really like the OGs. And who really, were the pioneers before there was really a course to, chart or a playbook to follow.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yep.
Yeah. Then we sort of had a lot of like sort of the and this isn't a criticism, but a lot of sort of the copycat, in the 2000s. Where a lot of people, were trying to build the Groupon for Latin America, or the whatever for Latin America.
Yeah.
And it seems like in the last, 6-7 years, you've had some projects that are much more, I think, sort of authentic to Latin America, and maybe beginning to try to solve some of the bigger problems that are affecting, the mass of the 600 people on the continent. And, the 200 or 300 million that really are living, at or below the poverty line. What's been your sense? Have you, you've been talking with entrepreneurs along the way. Do you think that that's correct? I mean, what's sort of your perspective in terms of the evolution of the entrepreneurs themselves?
I think that, and I'm generalizing grossly, is that Latin America generally, and particularly like the press,
right,
has wildly underestimated the entrepreneurial potential and capacity of would-be Latin American entrepreneurs. And like very like specific example of about 8 or 9 years ago. We started a program in Colombia with some partners down there, and was primarily working with large companies that had some idea for some new growth business that really didn't fit in their core, and somehow we were actually very successful, actually starting about 15 new growth businesses over a period of years. And I would go down and do these workshops and stuff. And long story short is, when I was doing that work in Colombia, every time I go down there, I would do a couple of interviews, and you always get a bunch of questions. One question that always came up was, how come we can't do this here? Some version of, hey, like what they do in California or wherever else, it's like, hey, why can't we do that here? And I just got so like annoyed with that question. I was like, look, I can point to like 20 amazing, in this case, like Colombian entrepreneurs,
right,
that have created like phenomenally successful growth businesses. And the one thing I will say that really, something you said that really resonated with them, overwhelmingly, they were, hey, there's a unique problem, opportunity, challenge here that a meaningful population faces. And it's really like a homegrown insight with a homegrown business model, rather than a Groupon for Latin America or whatever. And I'm not saying that can't work or hasn't worked, or let's like go learn elsewhere and then bring that learning back. I think that's great. I don't want to sound like a Neanderthal, but overwhelmingly, these companies saw something local. Simple example of that was like, with this company we worked with it in Colombia called Crescamos.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea, or the initial observation was like, wow, there's an enormous percentage of Colombian farmers and agricultural workers who have no bank, who are unbanked.
Right.
And because of that, they're kind of trapped in very low efficiency, low yield farming where they're almost living like, harvest to mouth,
Right.
and they
Right.
can't really, right? And and so, like, if you look at that at sort of a high level, you'd say, wow, we need to develop like better relationships, or like a field service, and go out and like, structure loans for these people. And it was, the whole like the banking part of the loans part was like was like a tiny piece of it.
Right.
There was a big cultural piece of, hey, you know what, this land is like my family's patrimony, and I'm not going to do anything that could conceivably jeopardize my ability to pass this on to the next generation. So
Right.
as long as we're like, anyhow, I won't get bogged down in it, but it turned out they had to innovate in ways that were not simply financial, right? They actually addressed this insecurity, created payback terms, and also provided things that weren't financial, like advice on farming
Right.
technologies and techniques, right? There was a much more that had to be offered to make it work.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting, that point. And actually, there's one of the guys who was a partner in Patagon. He ran the Mexico operations. We'd bought his business. He's like a management consultant now. And one of the things I've seen him do, and he did with me about 10 years ago, was helping the entrepreneurs reframe what
Yeah.
they're actually building. And so I remember, back 10 years ago, we were talking about, being a lawyer or something. And I was sort of dividing like that joke, like, okay, being a lawyer is my day job. I'm an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
the other time. And he's like, no, Juan, I mean, you don't sell legal services. What you're trying to do is, help thousands of entrepreneurs scale and grow their businesses and avoid friction.
Right.
And I began realizing,
Yeah.
like, that thesis, right? That's actually what I'm interested in doing. And so whether I do it as a lawyer or through the podcast or through articles, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. And I just sort of believe the money or whatever, that'll sort itself out. But that gave me a mission that actually unified what I was doing. And listening
Yeah.
to what you said, I think that's so true, that if the person crecemos or crezcamos,
Crezcamos. Yeah.
pescamos, is sort of like, hey, what I'm helping is, these people sort of, not lose their land, stay, conserve,
right.
conserve the patrimony they've been given and the traditions they've been given. Yeah, you build a business model around that, but then there's all this other stuff that you just
Absolutely
do,
right.
por el amor al arte, almost.
Así es. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and lots, and we got lots of stories, like that of, sort of a mentality. I remember we worked with a big insurance company that wanted to do, and I'll just do simple things, like they wanted to develop a product for disability insurance, very well intended for like artisan workers, handymen, craftsmen, like guys who, and it was overwhelmingly men who, like, their work like fed the family, paid the rent.
Right.
They were working in trades where accidents happened, and so if they weren't able to go to work for some reason, like, they were toast.
Yeah.
And so we did some work with Sura on this and some other firms as well. But what was interesting is, when we started to look at, like, well, why aren't these people buying, disability, packages?
Right.
A lot of it was, from a competition standpoint. It was like, well, you know what? I stop at the church on the way to the job site, and like I say a few, like, Hail Marys, or I'm not Catholic, and like it works, right? It works. And so it's like, wow, we're actually competing with like church, and the real value proposition actually wasn't around insurance, but it was bringing people from the fringes of participation in the formal economy, giving them a way to essentially professionalize and credential their skills.
Right.
And it was almost more like training, and it wasn't union membership, but it was like professionalizing their work. And by the way, something that comes with that is the ability to have insurance, the ability to have access to um, loans and banking facilities, et cetera. But it was much more about, and then just for the pride of feeling like you were part of something rather than on the fringe of it.
Right.
And yeah, and similarly, we worked on like, like retirement savings and like pensions and annuities and things with another Colombian company, Protección. And one of the things we found was like people were just uncomfortable. Many people were just uncomfortable with the idea of buying like these financial products, and they were much more comfortable buying livestock.
Wow.
Like I don't know what you're talking about with like an annuity or life insurance, but like I know what a cow is. Right?
It's incredible.
Right? Like I can have more
Right.
cows, give cows to my kids, or if I die, they got like and so you learn these things about competition, and I'm not,
Right.
I just think that the idea of like solving problems in ways that are specific to the group of people who you're trying to help, those ideas generally work out better than I saw something happen somewhere else and I'm gonna like, put a new wrapper on that, whether that's Groupon or like rolling up ambulance companies.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
No, that's that. Yeah, that point about solving. I mean, you brought it up. What's the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah.
We've seen so many projects that are sort of solutions in search of a problem, right? Hey, so one reason I really wanted to chat with you is the title of your book, Competing Against Luck.
Yeah.
And it really, I'd written an article that was a few years ago that was pretty well received, where I was talking that, entrepreneurs need to sort of, when they start, sort of know themselves well enough to know, are they a baker or are they an artist?
Right.
And the world needs both. But, some people aren't probably going to, aren't Marco Galperin, aren't going to build, a $40 billion company that's larger than eBay, right? Which was a company copied to begin with, larger in terms of market cap anyhow.
Yeah.
And then there's, many people who are maybe less risk averse, less, going to, write the history of the TecnoLatino or of entrepreneurship. And they're more bakers, right? But they can still have a huge impact. And, we know that without bakers, we're not going to eat nearly as well, right? So, what I was interested, and I thought, people, is this whole idea of, artists tend to, not be so metrics driven, not be very scientific, right? And they're just leading con la panza, and, and they're super creative, and, that sometimes works. It often doesn't. And when it does work, it's beautiful, but it often doesn't work and it's painful, right?
Yeah.
So for the people who are more bakers, let's say, the entrepreneurs, panaderos, this idea of competing against luck and trying to give yourself sort of the best opportunity to succeed, I'd love to, chat about.
I appreciate your asking the question. So, and hopefully I can give a specific answer, Joe. I mean, the title was actually something that Clay came up with. It was sort of funny. Like this was a big book for HarperCollins, the publisher, and in fact, it was their biggest business book from an investment standpoint for 2016. And
wow.
I had always assumed like the way they come up with titles would have some like scientific process to it, but it was much more like, hey, what do you guys think it should be called?
Oh, really? So there wasn't a lot of A/B testing?
No, I was like, really? Is that how this goes? And because I'd been involved with other books before, but they weren't like this kind of high profile and stuff. And anyhow, we had like all these names and we whittled it down, and we like all of a sudden, like, one day Clay comes, he's like, what do you think about this? And he really liked it. And so everybody liked it enough, and it's fine. And I think what he liked about it, and I think all of us came to like, was really this notion of, competing against luck is an attractive thing to do. In other words, if and what that a way to translate that is if you've got a model for innovation that's based on understanding of causality, and you're competing against people who are using models that are based just on correlations,
Right.
you're gonna win most of the time, you know. And so our ingoing um,
So can you
finding,
break that
yeah,
down, right, for people who haven't been to business school?
right, sure. So
Could
the
you just
way that you think about like the way still that most marketing dollars or innovation dollars get allocated, they're based on assumptions of correlation. In other words, you've got a bunch of say product attributes or performance dimensions of an offering, and then you've got like whether if it's B2B, it might be like different characteristics of companies, or in a B2C case, it would be you know say different demographics or psychographics, and you sort of like do some kind of matching of like, well, this Taddy Hall guy lives in the suburbs of New York, and he's married with a couple kids, and he drives a crappy old car, and like you add all these things up, and you're like, aha, you know. I think that he's going to be like a perfect bet for like an ad for Old Navy pants, or you're like whatever,
right,
but it's just sort of like it's that correlation of, hey, like people who look like this tend to buy products like that, which is to your like science, or baker thing. It's like that's pretty thin science, right? It's like it doesn't.
right.
And so really the genesis for our research that ultimately led to the book was a really simple question, which is like, is there a causal relationship that explains why somebody actually might buy a pair of pants or a newspaper or a car or a coffee? Or is it really kind of luck? Like, can you sort of like get to a certain point, but really you got to like just take a leap of faith and take a lot of chances, and kind of the old venture capital model of let's make a bunch of bets, and we know a bunch of them aren't going to pay off, but you can't really know which ones. And so long and short of it is like that was essentially the research that we ended up doing. And at the time I was actually at Nielsen, we had a ton of data on new product failure as well as new product launches, successes, which is hard to have access to,
Right.
because people will often share data on success, but they're not as quick to share it on failure. But we had a lot on both, and so anyhow, allow us to sort of like create effectively amount of test and control samples and build out this construct. And that's where this whole idea of jobs to be done, which is really the core of what competing against luck is about, which is instead of thinking about aspects of product or aspects of customer, the real unit of successful innovation work is circumstance in which an individual is struggling to make progress in their personal or professional lives. And
Hmm.
if you can understand the circumstance, and the circumstance is a very different thing to focus on than product attributes, which is usually where like the journey starts. It's like, I'm going to build a really good,
Right.
widget, and it's going to have all these features to it. And then I'm going to take that really good widget, and I'm going to go find people who I think could benefit from it, rather than starting with a very specific circumstance, and whether that is, you know, I'm trying to make lunch for myself each day to take to work, and I've got a bunch of trade-offs to make around that, or I really love my cat, but I struggle with the fact that the cat really wants wet cat food, and I want to give it dry cat food, right? And so and I can tell stories about innovations that address those things, but the real locus for successful innovation journeys start in circumstances where people are struggling, where there's real energy for progress that's manifest in some trade off or anxiety or stress or some dimension of experience that's currently being frustrated or unfulfilled. And that's where successful thinking starts. And that's where the book essentially takes root, which is if you can create offerings that successfully resolve these circumstances of struggle by enabling desired progress and creating desired experiences, you won't have to rely on luck because you'll actually will have developed an offering which predictably is going to be pulled into people's lives in order to deliver the desired progress and experience.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. As you were talking, I was, you know, I remember back, I guess it was 16, 17, hearing you speak at an Endeavor event. And yeah, the way I understood it was, that rather than think about the product characteristics, almost think about sort of the pain point you're trying to solve. And that's really what motivates people to spend money and buy something.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important, like one of the words we always use, a couple of things. One is there real energy for progress? I remember.
What does that mean? I mean,
so I remember. Here's a simple example. I remember doing some work with Procter and Gamble a number of years ago, and one of my colleagues said, if we want to figure out how to sell more Tide detergent, you could talk to 500 satisfied Tide consumers,
right?
You wouldn't learn very much. But if you talk to 5 people who just started using Tide and 5 people who just stopped using Tide,
Wow.
you'd actually could learn a lot because really the insights live at those moments where consumers expend some energy to switch.
Wow.
Right? Like it's like, you know what? I'm not using Tide anymore because of these reasons, and I see something else, and there's characteristics of that offering that actually will resolve my problem in ways that that Tide fails to, and that's people leaving Tide.
Right.
Now, on the flip side of people coming into Tide, like what did they come from? And so when you can find those moments where people are actually expending energy to change, you can learn a lot versus, I drink this sparkling water kind of all day long and it's fine, but I don't think you learn that much from. Do you like the bubbles? Yeah, I like the bubbles. Do you like the flavors? Yeah, I like but there's no. I'm not struggling with something, now.
Right.
So it's where you want to look for the energy. And so that's a really important dimension. And the other thing that where energy leads you as, say, an innovator, an entrepreneur is to this notion of where are they trying to get to? And that's why it's, often this notion of jobs to be done is so important. And that notion of progress. One of the phrases that we often repeat with clients is, if you think of all of your products, services, not just as a bundle of performance attributes, but if you think of every product as a service that enables some desired progress, you actually get much closer to the way that people think of that your customers actually experience your products in their personal or professional lives. It's something that enables progress, enables experience, resolves some circumstance of struggle. And so capturing those sort of, documentary journeys, if you will, of how people move gives you much better information in terms of data for crafting successful innovations than simply trying to match attributes of product to attributes of potential customer.
What's also super interesting is in your example, you don't have to talk with 100. I mean, it's also, as
That's right.
For earlier stage entrepreneurs. I mean, you don't have unlimited budgets. You don't.
That's right.
Unfortunately, you can't hire you all to come in and But right. I mean, instead of having to talk with 100 customers, you talk with the 10 that are really going to give you insights.
And that's really important. There's a couple things what you just said, which is at that discovery part of the process, statistical significance is irrelevant, right?
Right.
You're not
Right.
looking for the average. You're looking for the
Exactly.
people on the edge who say, you know what, isn't good enough, or what I was using before isn't good enough, and you need to that. Those are the people you listen to. Clay had a sign in his office
Yeah.
before he died, and it was a sign that he made himself. One of his favorite activities was dumpster diving, as he called it. And there was a hardware store that he would pass when he drove from Harvard Business School, his office, home to his, where he lived in
Right.
Belmont. And every once in a while, he'd go around back, no joke,
That's amazing.
his minivan, and all 6, 7 of them, would dive in there and he'd get pieces of wood. Well, anyhow,
Oh my God.
and he made nice things. He made tables and little pieces and bureaus and drawers. But he made a sign,
Right.
and in his office, and it said "Anomalies Wanted," and he always pointed that as a reminder to people who were sort of struggling with ideas or struggling
Right.
with innovation projects, that that when you're trying to get the data inputs, those signals that you need to hear, it's not the satisfied center. It's actually kind of the funky fringes where the
Right.
insights live. And so you're exactly right. You don't need to. We're working right now with one of the largest restaurant chains in the world right now about their breakfast menu. And we're going to talk to a sum total of about 15 people.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's really, as you say, it's the anomaly.
Yeah.
And is the idea that the insights that you learn in terms of customer behavior, what's motivating people to change, either to leave your business or to come to your business, that they're sort of the point of the spear. And if you can solve for them, by definition, you're solving for the middle. Is that sort of the idea?
Well, so what you find, what I would say is when you're innovating, you're really not trying to create something for the middle. What you're really trying to do is,
Right.
let me say it this way. There's when you think about innovation, there's lots of ways you could think about innovation. But when you think about your innovation dollars, you could think about allocating those innovation dollars into 3 types of innovation. The dollars that really address the mass of your market would be what we call sustaining innovation. So it's how do you make your existing products, a little bit better for your existing customers, so that you can fend off competitors and continue to maintain their loyalty over time.
Yep.
Toyota makes a Prius each year that's a little bit better than the Prius from last year, and that's great, and they have to do it. Like, I'm not dinging it, like, you got to do it. And that's actually where, like, that and a second form of innovation is where 80-90% of the dollars go. The second form of innovation is efficiency innovation, right? So how do we take cost out? How do we take waste out? How do we deliver the same value, like, more efficiently,
Right.
so we can keep our prices attractive for our customers and make sure that we maintain profits? So the sustaining innovation and the efficiency innovation are fundamental. They're critical in terms of your success, and being able to survive. But over time, where the growth comes from is a third type of innovation, which is what we call market creating innovation, right? Which is how do you actually expand categories? Where are the non-consumers, the folks you aren't serving today? Who are they? Where do they live? Like, what are they doing today? And what are their unique circumstances that are blocking them from using your product, assuming they find themselves in the same circumstances as your existing customers? Is it expertise? Like, do you have to be really sophisticated, to know how to use this software? And if you don't have that skills or expertise, you know what? Like, it's too complicated for me.
Right.
Is it money? Like, do you have to be really rich to be able to buy your own plane?
Right.
So it's not just high end, low end. So, like, if I'm sticking with private planes, something I know nothing about, but, like, That's Wheels Up is market creating innovation because it enabled a huge population of people who could
Right.
never afford to buy their own plane. Suddenly, this like idea of like fractional ownership, I can just buy a bunch of hours.
Right.
That enables not me, but people I know,
Right.
right,
Yeah.
to suddenly have access to something that historically was reserved for a smaller population. And so the point is that if you talk to the right people who can tell you about their circumstances in which they're struggling, you can understand then from an innovation standpoint, what are the dimensions of benefit that I need to build into an offering such that these struggling customers can actually become part of the measured market um, uh, versus where they are today. And I give millions of examples of that.
You don't have to. That's a good thing.
Yes.
No, I think we get it. No, I was listening to that, the sort of three kinds of innovation, because I mean, what's super interesting here is we're getting an insight as to what the corporates, the big corporates, are hearing from their consultants. So we have this sort of marginal innovation that happens to improve a product, tweak it. There's the innovation that happens to reduce the cost and make it a better value.
Efficiency innovation.
Right, the efficiency. And then there's this innovation, which is creating a new market creation.
Mm-hmm.
This market creation, is that where if you have a an innovative sort of business model, and you're thinking about how to make yourself attractive to a corporate, is what you're interested in terms of that beauty pageant, trying to position yourself sort of that you can help solve for that?
Well, I can only speculate on why a corporate might want to buy another company. There's lots of reasons for that. But what's certainly true is, like, you've mentioned a bunch of companies in this call, whether it was, Patagon or Mercado Libre or, a handful of others. Those companies all started by taking root in market creating innovation. They all initially addressed populations of customers who were excluded from consuming, using different products and services that really had been, the purview of more sophisticated, wealthier, right? And so they created new markets where none existed. And you can do that in massive ways, as those companies did, or you can do it in small ways. Now, that can be one thing that's incredible. And those types of companies are hugely attractive to corporates to buy. And the reason they are is that market creating innovation does not align well with the existing capabilities and the existing incentives that are resident within a large corporation. They've got resource allocation rules and financial incentives to pursue efficiency. And they've got similarly capabilities and incentives to introduce sustaining innovation. But market creating innovation is always going to look unattractive, risky, too small. And so they're happy essentially to outsource that. And then once somebody else has created a compelling business model, hey, it's cheaper for me as the big company to buy that versus to build it on my own.
No, it's so true what you say about incentives. I remember, one time at Patagon, when Wences was talking about, selling the company at some point, and, his point was, this is something you could, only can be decided by, the chairman, the owner.
Yeah.
Because, his point was, hey, if somebody buys a company in a typical corporation and, they overpay, it doesn't work out, they could lose their job. And if it works out great, maybe, their year-end bonus is $50,000 bigger. So it's, the risk reward there, they're never going to want to take a risk, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
So very much in line. No, but that's such an important insight, because, one of the things that's happening more and more in Latin America is you're beginning to see more corporate venture capital.
Yes.
People like Cemex, et cetera, doing things, and entrepreneurs are trying to figure out, how to try to position themselves with these corporates, and that's a very interesting insight.
Well, I've done some work. We done some work with Cemex in Mexico, and because they've told this story publicly, I'll give you a simple example. We worked with Argos. We worked with Argos, another one of the world's largest cement companies based in Colombia, and they actually identified an opportunity that their capabilities essentially precluded them from addressing, which was tens of millions of Colombian homeowners who have essentially incomplete construction or renovation projects on their home.
Right. That's so true. That's so Latin America.
Right. Like most.
No, there was a building in Lima that wasn't completed. It was supposed to be, 20 stories. They did 15 stories. It never was finished. And some people just moved in. It wasn't squatting. People had paid, and they, the developer went out of business. But that's those projects that are never done.
These were simple things like, when it rains hard here,
my
whole driveway washes out. So I want to put down like a cement driveway. Right. Or, we've got a second floor, but it's not complete. Or we're building, we're extending our house a little bit. And so what you find is and you still find it, is projects in various stages of completion. Right. And so the point is it never looked attractive to Argos to be in the small batch business, right? Like if you want a whole truck, we'll send you a truck.
Right.
How many trucks do you want? No.
No, right. I want a shopping cart.
Exactly. And so they had the idea, and they actually wanted some help in creating that business. They ended up sort of those capabilities and resource allocation rules really created too big a wall, and it never happened. But they loved they came back and spoke to many of our participants and said, it was wonderful. It's we failed for all the reasons that this jerk told us we would fail, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so they've been wonderful, and they've been very, very successful.
Right.
But that's where an entrepreneur could be successful. It's they'd see these people, you go out and see people who have incomplete construction projects. You're what's going on there? Right. So anyhow.
No, that's amazing. Well, look, Taddy, I really appreciate the time. It's been incredible to get a chance to chat with you and get these insights, and definitely some very actionable things. Hey, one last question before I let you go. What advice do you want to give entrepreneurs from Latin America to maintain their optimism and strength in these difficult times?
Well, one thing I would say right now is, and this is not unique to me, is never waste a crisis.
Right.
And there's plenty of data on this, which is that inevitably in every industry, in every crisis, and you can go back to not just the recent crises of SARS, but go back to the Spanish flu or the Great Depression. And there are always a handful of companies, call it 10, 15%, that invest into these crises. And they pay out they don't just win in the short term, they win in the long term. And so, what I would encourage, I understand the reality and brands, companies, you got to first focus on survival and keeping the lights on.
Right.
But what's going on in the marketplace now, when you look around at people, is we're all adapting our personal and professional lives. And I sort of think about it in three different ways, right? One is forced adaptation. So my younger daughter just turned 10 this weekend.
Right.
We did a virtual birthday party. That is not something that we're going to be doing in the future, right?
Right.
If she turns 11, she's got, right. So that was a forced adaptation that we had to right. And there's a lot of those, and those do not really that. That's not useful, innovation fodder, right?
Right.
There are other things that are more like, say, willing adoption, right? Like, hey, you know what? I've got like zillions of friends who like bought a Peloton, or like now
Right.
they're doing. They don't. Not only have they stopped going to the gym, but they're like, you know what?
Right.
I've now found ways to work out at home that really work well for me, and I don't really want to go back to the gym. Or
Right.
think about all that's going on with like telemedicine or like in-home diagnostic testing, right? It's like
Right.
there are worlds of things where we're sort of forced to do things, but we're finding out, hey, in that world of kind of willing adoption, there's a lot of innovation opportunity. And then the third thing I would say is, and we've actually done research on this, and it's much stronger actually in emerging markets than in well-developed markets, is when we ask people about, hey, when this is all over, to the extent that's going to be over, do you want to go back to the way things were before?
Right.
Or are you actually excited about some of the possibilities that this kind of shakeup's a
Yep.
real euphemism, that this crisis has opened up? And overwhelmingly in emerging markets, people are more excited about sort of the new reality to be created. And so whether that's about like distance learning or refocusing on like your family and those values,
Right.
you know, so what I'm saying to, I guess is a very long way of saying to executives and to entrepreneurs is, I get you have to survive, but then go look for, everybody's doing these different kinds of behaviors. I would try and ignore like the forced adaptations, like the virtual birthday parties,
Right.
but
Right.
find where people have like willingly adopted things.
Yeah.
And number one, and number two, find where people may have like shifted their priorities and say, you know what, finding ways to connect with my kids or my family, it really matters to me. And I'm going to continue to look for ways to connect with my family. You know, that kind of stuff where priorities may have shifted. There's been a massive boom, for example, in online estate planning and taking care of your wills, right?
Yeah.
Not because I think I'm going to die, but it's like, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I've had this in the back of my head for a long time. Now I'm going to take care of it.
Yeah.
So if you find these things where people's priorities or values have shifted or things have become elevated, those are all opportunities. And so for entrepreneurs who have the eyes to like look and listen, the opportunities are out there. And Marcel Proust had a wonderful quote, and I'll end with this, which is, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new sights, but in having new eyes. And if we can just learn to look for these opportunities, they're all out there. We just need to look for those circumstances of struggle. And in this particular context, innovation opportunities are everywhere.
Buddy, you're amazing. Thank you so much. I'll send you a virtual hug for now, and I'll give you a real hug in a couple months.
I can't wait for that for so many reasons. It's wonderful to see you. And thank you so much for inviting me on your program. To the 8.
No, you're the best. Take care, man.
Este fue otro programa de Aquí y Ahora, auspiciado por PAG.law, especialista en Venture Capital. Hasta pronto.